Well, welcome to Friday Live, everybody. Colin Harper here. Brian Peluso sitting next to me. We have Laura, newly named Scholes, there with us as well, and we've got Michael Kutch too. Laura is currently going through the headache of changing her name, and I think it's updated just about everywhere. So if you don't recognize it, that's where it's from. Thanks for joining us. We're going to dive into the Secure Act today. There's been a bunch of changes about that. The general gist is it was an act that made it through Congress kind of in the last couple of days of the year, and a significant amount of changes specifically regarding retirement accounts and IRAs are going to come through. So Laura, Brian, and I are going to talk about that. But before we get into that, and I would encourage you to stick around, there's a lot of important information, pretty much applicable to just about everybody there. Before we get into that, Mike, it has been there's been a ton of negative news in this cycle, but the market seems to be ignoring it. The S&P and some of the other indices are fairly well year to date. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, and before we start, just to mention, this is just for educational purposes only and shouldn't be taken as a specific recommendation. But yeah, like you said, both the equity and fixed income markets had a really strong week and overall good start to a year. This week, it was kind of a carry forward from that weaker wage growth we got on Friday and the weaker ISM services data. The Fed speak we've gotten has been messaging a likelihood of a 25 basis point increase at their next meeting and getting above that 5% level while staying there, as Bosnick would say, for a long time. Although markets gave back a lot of the gains after his messaging, overall, the market's getting less and less spooked by hawkish Fed messaging. Treasury yields across the board have seen significant declines over the past week or so, which translates to higher bond prices. The bond market is calling out the Fed, saying they're not going to get to their 5% Fed funds target or above that. We did get CPI out yesterday, and it came directly in line with estimates. That's the first time I can say that going back 12 months or so. It's usually a miss, and the past 12 months, it's been usually hotter than expected. But they came in line. The headline number declined 0.1% for the month, which comes out to 6.5% annually, down from 7.1%. Core, which excludes those volatile areas of food and energy, ticked up 0.3% for the month, which is higher than we got in November. However, on an annualized basis, that still declined to 5.7%. The S&P 500 retested and failed the 200-day moving average and that downtrend line that's been in place for the last 12 months. Today is the official start to earnings season with the major banks reporting. The markets initially opened down on some of the earnings results, but they pared back much of those losses. Bank earnings overall were pretty mixed, decent for the quarter, but a lot of them flagged concerns about the likelihood of a mild recession this year and have increased their loan loss provisions to reflect that. I see earnings as probably the biggest near-term risk to markets. Right now, there's about a 5% increase for the current year, and I think that's still a little too high. So if that comes out to be flat for the year or negative, that means investors would have to rely solely on those PE multiples to expand, which may be limited in a higher rate environment. With that said, I don't think it's unreasonable to see a mid to upper single digit return for the current year. I also would like to note that I am becoming a little more interested in some regions outside the United States, given their cheap valuation compared to history and the falling dollar. But if I add exposure, we're still going to be pretty underweight in that area.
I think that's one of the bigger shifts happening right now is that interest in emerging markets again, because it's been a very long time. I mean, it's been a good, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a good 10 plus years since there was really any significant interest in emerging markets. Always worthwhile to hold it for a diversification standpoint, but I've heard a lot of rumblings about that recently, which is a pretty interesting trend I think we're seeing.
And that's kind of international outside the U.S. in general. It's really been an underperformance for about 12 years or so. But in like Europe, for example, the story's coming out that, the winter isn't as cold as they thought. Their economies are holding up a little better than expected. And valuations are pretty cheap. And now you have that falling dollar that I think is falling below the peak of 2020 right now. So that trend is really broken down, which helps those international investing in international stocks from a U.S. basis.
Awesome. Well, speaking of warmer winters, I know the kids are kind of back from holiday break, and that kind of leads us into the Secure Act discussion a little bit. I know with warmer weather, hopefully those kids that are still at home are getting out and being able to do more activities, so you're not stuck with them. So I'm going to kick it over to Laura, and she's going to talk about some really important changes we're seeing as it relates to 529 plans and those vehicles designed for saving for college.
So, Mike, first off, before we get started with the 529s, if you need me to go to Europe or like any of the countries over there, I can give you a list. I'm happy to go to like Italy, Croatia, Greece, like any of those. So I can do some research for you.
I'd probably send you to one of the bigger countries like Germany. I'll let you know.
I could go there, Germany, Ireland, Scotland.
No, Croatia and Italy are only a train ride away, Laura. So you
But yeah, thanks, Colin. So some really big things with the Secure Act 2.0 that we've been learning about. And, you know, a lot of our clients come to us and say, what can we do for our kids? How can we save money for them? And the two most common options are the 529, which is higher education savings, as well as the UTMA accounts, which are just general savings accounts that are in the kids' names that they get when they're 21 in PA. It's different age for each state. But people come to us and say, well, what happens if my kid doesn't go to college? Or what happens if they don't further their education or don't use all of that? And our answer always used to be, well, you can change the beneficiaries until starting next year, 2024, you'll be able to roll those 529 accounts into Roth IRAs. Now, with that being said, they are still within the limits of the Roth IRAs, which will be $6,500 for 2023. So you may have to do it in increments if you have more than the $6,500 2023 numbers for your kid. And then as long as they save it for at least 5 years, they can let that grow for retirement, or they can use it for certain things such as buying their first home.
So I think that's a pretty fantastic change. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles where people don't want to, you know, there's a lot of unknowns with children and college expenses. You know, the example I use is they get a full sports scholarship, which we know isn't often the case. You know, a lot of times kids decide that maybe college is not the path they want to take and they end up in one of the trades. Now this takes a lot of the risk out of devoting money to specifically college funding, which I think is a very awesome change. And just to frame it, I think there are a lot of positive changes in this act, you know, so we're here to share some good news in the midst of a miserable news cycle with today. So Brian's going to continue that train of thought a little bit as well and talk about some more of the changes here.
Yeah, and the package that was passed December 23rd of 2022 is called, the full name is Secure Act 2.0. So obviously there was a Secure Act 1.0, which was back in 2020. And many of you would recognize that one of the big provisions of the original Secure Act was to change the required minimum distribution on your IRAs from 70 and a half to 72. Now, the required minimum distribution is an amount that certain people at a certain age have to take out of their IRA. You're required to do it. So you save into a traditional IRA, you get a little tax break on the way in, it grows tax deferred. But when you take money out of that traditional IRA, you're going to pay taxes. And that's often very onerous as people get to a certain age. They've got Social Security coming in, maybe taking some money out of their portfolio. Now they've got this required amount. The IRS says, hey, this IRA has been protected from taxes for a long time. I got to dip into it a little bit. And that's the required minimum distribution. So Secure Act 1.0 said originally everybody at 70 and a half that has an IRA has to start taking out a certain percentage every year. And then they changed it to 72. Well, as of December 23, 2022, when the Secure Act, which by the way stands for setting every community for retirement enhancement. That's the Secure Act. That's what it stands for. What the big changes, and the most immediate change and the most important for anybody that is joining us today, if you turn 72 in the year 2023, you are probably preparing to take your required minimum distribution out of your IRA. However, with Secure Act 2.0, you're not going to need to do that. The new required minimum distribution age, when you turn 73, is when you have to start taking money out. And actually, they're going to increase that. Starting in 2023, the age is going to be, 2033, the age is going to be 75. So if you're turning 72 this year and you had been planning since Secure Act 1.0 that you're going to start taking money out of your RMD because you turned 72 in this calendar year, you actually don't have to take your RMD this year. So you can let that IRA grow if you would like, and then start the required minimum distribution at the age of 73, which would be next year. Now, if you turned 72 last year, you already started your RMD, you continue with that program. But if you're turning 72 this year, you can actually wait until 2024 for your required minimum distribution. And, you know, the IRS is very, very serious about these required minimum distributions. Historically, the penalty for not taking what you're supposed to, when you're supposed to, out of your IRA was 50% of the amount you were supposed to take. So if you had a $10,000 for a year, a $10,000 required minimum distribution, you said, I don't want to take money out of my IRA. I'm not going to do it. And you were required to based on age and the appropriate law at that time, the penalty was 50%. You had a $5,000 penalty if you missed that $10,000 required minimum distribution. Secure Act 2.0 has changed that. The penalty now will be 25% instead of 50%. Still very, very onerous. They are still very serious about when you are supposed to take money out of your traditional IRA that you go ahead and do that. But they're reducing that 50% penalty to 25% penalty. And if there's a little oops in there and you contact the IRS, it could be as low as 10%. If you miss that RMD.
Which I think is a really reasonable change. You know, RMDs get missed in our experience for a number of reasons, right? We just people completely forget about it. There's another IRA outside that they didn't realize they had. You know, ultimately it's your responsibility as the IRA owner to take that. The custodian or us as, you know, if we happen to be your advisors, it is ultimately up to you to ensure that distribution takes place. We certainly do our best to remind all the folks we work with. But, you know, just important to keep attention to that. You know, that's a big one. We don't want to give away free money to the IRS. Thankfully, you know, it's a bit of a tangent. It looks like those 80,000 new agents they were trying to hire didn't go through.
I don't think that will.
I don't think that went through. So I don't think that would have helped tax penalties for anybody. I think a lot of us would have been.
That was one of the first proposals of the House of Representatives.
Mhm.
Now that it is controlled by the Republicans, that was one of the first things they came out and said, "Hey, wait a minute, let's call off the hounds here for the IRS."
And one of the most interesting things of that proposal was the willingness to use deadly force in the job description on the IRS's website, which is I never really
That was a
fully
little
understood
strong,
that.
I thought.
It was a little strong for tax audits, I thought. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a typo
we'll have to
or if
see
we
how
can
that-
go down the conspiracy theory path later in this episode. But so kind of building on.
I will say, though, I would like to emphasize one thing about the Secure Act 2.0. There's a lot of positive things in there. There's a lot of flexibility. They're designing flexibility around saving, in particular for retirement. Laura had outlined a little bit for college as well. There's less penalties if you make a mistake in your retirement planning. But make no mistake, what is happening here is a continued re-emphasis, which really started in the 80s, of everyone needs to recognize your retirement is going to be your responsibility. So for younger folks, you probably don't remember, but your grandparents, maybe your great grandparents, they retire, a pension check shows up, Social Security shows up, and you're fine. It's no longer that way.
Mm-hmm.
The Secure Act is really moving forward on the idea that if you're not already retired or close to retired and done all of your planning, if you have many years to retirement, do not think any other thing than your retirement is going to be your responsibility. That's why they're expanding how much can go into retirement plans. That's why they're making these retirement plans more flexible. So just embrace that concept that this is the government helping us, giving us a lot of positive ways to save, but they're sending a clear message, as clear as they have since the 80s when they really started this process. You are responsible for your retirement. If you're 20 years from retirement, in 20 years from now, you really shouldn't expect to look around and wait for the government checks to start showing up. This is going to be your responsibility. You need to embrace these changes and take advantage of these changes.
Oh, I think that's a huge point. And kind of building on that, the other changes we're seeing, kind of the big ones I want to highlight on today, is to retirement accounts, not just IRAs, but if we look at SEP and simple IRAs, which if you're not sure what that is, don't worry, you probably don't have one. Most people that have those are familiar with them. They're small business retirement plans, the SEP and simple specifically. You're going to have the option to do a Roth inside of those plans now, which is something you could never do before. So that's a very cool change.
And of course, the Roth is going to be, you pay taxes before the money gets in
exactly.
there, and then the money grows tax deferred. And if you do it right, you may never pay taxes on that money again. So you pay taxes once on the way in, and then maybe never on the way out, as opposed to the traditional, where you get a little tax deduction, you get a tax break on the way in, you get tax deferral while it's in there, and then on the way out, it's taxable. So the real difference between traditional and Roth is when you pay the taxes.
You better be careful. You're just making it sound so good. I might have to turn into Billy Mays Hayes here and start selling Roths inside my SEPs and simples. Okay.
But no, I mean, so almost from a blanket statement, if you have the opportunity to contribute Roth dollars versus traditional IRA dollars, and generally the thought is, and you need to do some planning for your specific situation, but generally the thought is taxes are going up, not down. That's historically what we've seen, and that's our general mindset when it comes to that. We also have some stimulus that needs to get clawed back at some point that's still out there.
There's a few nickels.
There's a few nickels of stimulus. So, if you have the ability to make Roth contributions, it's a fantastic way to have tax-free money you can access in retirement, which makes a massive difference. Also, pretty much across the board, Laura mentioned this already, but contribution limits are going up, which is never a bad thing. So it's good to see those changes. Sometimes they seem pretty slow, but it seems it's always good to have those contribution limits increase. It's just added flexibility to how much you can put away through different sources. That's just the tip of the iceberg of the Secure Act. I mean, one thing I'm going to mention, just so it's top of mind for everybody, if you have an inherited IRA that you inherited in the last couple of years, you are going to need to pay close attention to RMD rules as far as that goes. Not from spouse to spouse, but specifically if you inherited an IRA from a non-spouse. I'm not going to go into that because that gets a bit complex quickly, but just make sure you know what your requirements are from an RMD standpoint if you inherit an IRA from someone who was not your spouse. With that,
yeah, what happened there was those rules changed last year, and they were there was some gray area there, and they've been clarified. So this is really kind of breaking news, because the guidance the IRS gave us last year has already changed into this year.
Oh yeah.
So that's going to be a very important thing to pay attention to, what you need to take out of those inherited IRAs and when. And we can give you a lot of guidance on that.
But kind of with the theme of the whole Secure Act, they want you to take increased personal responsibility in your retirement plan. And from us, philosophically, we think that is a good thing. And I think there are a lot of, thankfully, positive changes we're seeing here. I would say overwhelmingly, the response to this has been good. I really like a lot of these changes we're seeing from a planning standpoint. It frees us up to do a lot more cool, creative stuff when it comes to planning for folks in retirement. And that just means that, I would say now more than ever, with all these additional options, I would encourage you, if you're not sure of what your options are, seek some professional guidance, because the Secure Act, although extremely beneficial and a lot of cool things going on in it, it has made something that wasn't necessarily the most complex thing in the world. It's added a lot of layers of complexity that I would strongly encourage you seek some counsel with your trusted advisor to be able to correctly navigate those changes for your benefit. And if you don't have one, we would love to have a conversation with you and see what you're planning for and where we could help out. That being said, thank you so much for tuning in, everybody.
We would be remiss in
ahead.
not mentioning today is Friday the 13th. And so we want everybody to be safe out there. Watch out for black cats. And stuff.
Steer far away from black cats. Steer far away from black cats. It is Friday the 13th. So we'll see what strange things await me when I get home. But again, you know, we always love comments and feedback. So if you have any topics you would like to explore, please let us know. We always like to do timely topics, and we've got a whole great content calendar mapped out for you guys for this year. So again, as always, thank you for tuning in. Feel free to share this with anybody who might find it helpful. And if there's anything we can do for you, do not hesitate to reach out. Stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy, and we will see you all next week.